In the South, police began as slave patrols, while in the North, they began as a way to curb riots against the rich, according to Mya Aiton, who has taught at multiple universities, including Northwestern and Columbia, and the New York Times in June of 2020. Since the beginning, police have been working against marginalized people. As many of us reach the age of having jobs, we're going to pay taxes. A certain portion of our tax dollars goes towards our city's police department and public safety. American cities should defund their police departments. First, I'll talk about what the definition of defunding the police is. Second, I'll explain why it's needed. And finally, I'll list some of the ways that we can begin defunding them. So first, I'll explain what defunding the police means. There's a common misconception that defunding the police means completely abolishing any form of law enforcement. And while this is a belief that some people hold, it's not the majority. So defunding the police means shrinking the scope of police responsibilities and transferring those responsibilities to programs that are better equipped to handle them. And this is according to Christy Lopez, who is a professor at Georgetown Law School in the Washington Post in June 2020. These programs often aim to target the root causes of issues rather than just the surface level, and they include things like mental health care facilities, homelessness programs, job programs, and education. The hope is that by shifting these responsibilities to these programs, that we will need to rely on the police less and less in the future. So now that you know what defunding the police is, I'll explain why it's needed. So there are many problems with the current policing system in the United States. Overall, there is a normalization of violence. In 2016, 957 civilians were shot and killed by police officers. 25% of these civilians had one or more underlying mental health concerns, while 5% were unarmed. According to Sarah Moon, a licensed psychologist and former assistant director of training at the Jesse Danielson Institute at Boston University, and the Journal of Forensic Psychology Research and Practice, published in 2015. So one culprit of this ongoing violence could be police academies. These 48% of police academies follow a military-style curriculum, which teaches violence and defense rather than how to de-escalate situations. And in fact, more time is spent on firearms training than any other skill. So approximately 60 hours of a student's life at a police academy will be spent on firearms training, while only 8 hours are spent on conflict resolution and mediation. Police violence and racism are also heavily linked. Police brutality towards people of color is something that's gone on for years, and it's only now come to the forefront because of social media and the prevalence of recording devices and video evidence. So implicit bias is something that is extremely harmful and can even be fatal for many minority groups. Implicit bias is beliefs that one holds about a certain group of people based on assumptions or stereotypes. So this comes into play in high-risk situations. So if a cop feels threatened by a person of color, they may be more likely to turn to violence rather than try and talk down the situation. And in 2016, 25% of the victims in police shootings were Black, despite the fact that Black people only make up about 13% of the US population. Despite vast budgets, police officers often don't receive sufficient schooling. There are currently no national standards to screen, assess, or train police officers. This all varies from state to state, so because of this, there's actually very little information about what sort of training really goes on in police academies. According to Caroline Preston, who is a senior editor and writer with degrees from Brown and Columbia and the Hetchinger Report in June of 2020. There's also a definite lack of higher education in the police force. Less than 1% of sheriff and police departments currently require a 4-year degree. Higher education is crucial in developing better critical thinking skills and allows for more diverse leadership and different perspectives. Police are often expected to fill many roles outside of their job descriptions. Of the 10.7 million arrests that were made in 2016, only 4.83% of those were for violent offenses, such as robbery, rape, and murder. This isn't the average day-to-day for a police officer. They typically deal with non-violent or less serious crimes like possession of drugs, sex work, and traffic offenses. These are things that would better be handled by people with specific training in these areas, like rehab counselors, or by mental health care workers who are specifically trained how to de-escalate situations before they get out of hand. So now that you know some of the reasons why defunding the police is necessary, I'll explain how we can actually begin doing it. So it's up to individual police departments to look within and determine what their unnecessary funds are. So the minimum staffing requirement is something that needs to be looked at. The minimum staffing requirement is the least amount of police officers that need to be at a given post at a given time. And this is often based on what the agency deems fit rather than the actual workload. When a certain number of officers isn't met, extra officers are hired to fill those posts. And in 2019, Boston spent nearly $70 million on police overtime alone. according to Alexander Weiss, who holds a PhD from Northwestern University, in the Chicago Tribune in June of 2020. Non-sworn staff also should be utilized more. So currently, police officers are used for tasks such as collecting evidence at crime scenes, when in reality it should be non-sworn staff. These people often have degrees in things like forensics and on average cost less to pay than a police officer. First, I talked about what the definition of defunding the police is. Second, I explained why it's necessary. And finally, I listed a few of the ways how we can begin to defund the police. American cities should defund their police departments. By learning from the mistakes of our past and trying to implement change now, it can lead to a safer and happier future for all.
5:40, great.